I've had to pack dogs out. I had one pointer one time, he got cliffed out. He couldn't go down and he couldn't go up. He was on this huge overhang, and climbing out to him, putting him in my bird vest, and then climbing out where you're using hands and feet to get out of it. They smell a covey, 20 yards below them on a cliff, and sometimes they'll try to get down. You need a dog that wants to run to the top of every ridge and look. To each their own, and it's a great big bird dog world. But yeah, out here, you need to cover some ground. Most of our dogs will go 4 times the miles that you'll go. So if you go 10 miles, they'll go 40. And that's not busy just back and forth. That's up, down, around, working the wind. Some of those darn Georgia plantation videos where you got the pointers out and the setters out finding them, and then they release the cocker to flush them. I thought that'd be the coolest thing ever. That was a lot harder than I thought it would be, and not as practical in most instances for me. He would zoom in, and those birds just flying straight out. They're not getting up. So you're right over the top, and so you wouldn't get the shot.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY presented by Standing Stone Supply. I have my guest Steve Smith on the line. We're going to talk Western hunting, and specifically we're going to hit it off with what we were talking about right before we hit record. I want to know a little bit more about late season chukar hunting, because it sounds like it's just it's got a lot of challenges that I probably can't relate to. So Steve, first, thanks for joining us, and yeah, man, keep going on with what you're telling me about, the snow embankments, and if you're not careful, just falling off the edge of the earth, essentially.
Well, hey, let me say thanks, and it's an honor to be on with you. So I appreciate it. I don't know if there's anything I say that'll be worth listening to, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, we're in the middle of it right now, and here in kind of the Mountain West, Utah, Idaho, Nevada, some of these areas. A lot of times we get by into our late season. For us in Utah, it closes the middle of February. So we can chukar hunt right up until Valentine's Day. And a lot of times we don't get hit with snow. The chukar mountains are not the tall mountains. We have, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, even 13-foot mountains in Utah. Primarily, chukar are going to be out at, 6,000, 7,000, 5,000 feet out in the West Desert. So the snow the snow storms will kind of drift over those mountains. And so a lot of times you can go out there in the West Desert and it's not that bad. But last year was an exception to that. Shut us down early, couldn't get into a lot of the places. A lot of the places we normally go to, you're driving through to sometimes more feet of snow than that. Tire chains are huge. Usually the ATVs will get you over those rocky roads and get you up to where you can hunt. But if there's 2 or 3 feet of snow, it's really difficult to get in. And then who wants to hike in that on a, 40, 50 degree incline?
Right.
You got a little flavor for the steepness, right, of chukar?
Yeah, this as you're kind of describing this, I'm trying to relate it back to my experience. Obviously, what I did was early season, and so some chukar hunters probably won't even consider that as real chukar hunting as compared to late season. But, I'm just thinking where I went in Idaho is, it wasn't as high of elevation as what I was doing in Colorado with ptarmigan hunting, but it was still pretty high elevation. I want to say I'd have to look at Onyx to be certain, but I want to say we were around 6 to maybe 8,000 feet elevation as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if you were at 8, but maybe you were. But you're right. For us, it's so hot early season. Most of us don't chukar hunt until, November, because you can hunt blue grouse, rough grouse, quail, sharp tails, all of that up through October. October, if it cools off, we'll get out there. But snakes are a big deal. I run my dogs year round. And snakes aren't as much of a concern for me, but I've got a friend that he won't go until we get a good frost. And I think I've seen 3 or 4 rattlesnakes this year while out with the dogs. And
well, I came across 2 while in Idaho, and I think they had 1 frost by the time I was up there. I might be mistaken on that, but yeah, we saw 2. For sure. And so I can definitely see, whereas like obviously we have snakes down in our area and other areas that I've hunted with. So you kind of hear out west like, oh, snakes are a big deal. And you're like, okay, snakes are snakes. Well, just from my limited experience going out west, like I can tell that like just the amount of snakes, it's you'll have a much higher volume of them.
Yeah, and they're in areas where birds are. So you're out, dropping the tailgate and wanting to run out in an area, and you love southern exposures, rocks, cheatgrass, areas where mice and rabbits are, and so the snakes are right in there. A couple of years ago, I think it was April, I was out running, looking, just scouting out a new mountain range, and I had a pointer with me. And I noticed he kind of veered around this rock patch that we were cutting through, and I didn't think anything of it. And I got about halfway over a very small rock. My right foot's over it in the air, my left foot still in contact, and that buzzing starts right below me. And all of a sudden, I felt myself propelled about 6 feet through the air, not realizing what's happening. And, it didn't strike or anything, but it was a huge snake. I went back and it crawled under a rock as I was trying to dig my phone out, but it was probably 5.5 foot
Wow.
rattlesnake. But that snake breaking for all my dogs has worked great. I try to run through it every year.
Mm.
And then, yeah, I saw one of my young setters this year run right by a rattlesnake. Didn't pay it any mind. So
Wow.
thank goodness. But yeah, you get up in these areas where, if there's no snow, you're talking about a heck of a Jeep ride or a side-by-side ride, but you add, 6 inches, 2 feet of snow to that, and it just makes it impossible to get in there. So last year we had those conditions. The last week or so, we've had a pretty good storm too. That's kind of made it treacherous to hike those hills. I mean, I fall down enough sliding around on those slopes, trying to get to points and to birds. And then you throw some ice and snow on there, and it can be treacherous, but it's fun for sure. It's got to be.
Well, you mentioned ATV and a side by side a couple times. Are you hauling a trailer up there, or are you only doing ATVs or side by sides that can fit in the back of a truck?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're hauling trailers in most of the places we go. We don't have great hunting in Utah, but we do have birds, and so better than anybody, you're going to hunt what's there. And there's some days you won't see any birds, but we'll haul a trailer, 2 hours to get to an area where you can then unload and go on the ATV. In some areas you can't drive in. We've got some wilderness areas. You have to park, a mile from the mountain and then just hike up to it. And you're 2 hours of hiking before you can get to where a bird will be. About the time you get to the top, I'm getting old now. I'm like, whoa, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I was hunting yesterday though, and it was about 6 degrees with the wind chill. I was looking at one of my dogs today. It looks like his scrotum has some frostbite on it. It was cold yesterday. So that wind blowing, but you get it's a great opportunity out here to hunt late. Idaho runs through the end of January. So in Utah again through the middle of February. So
Yeah.
why wouldn't we be out there trying to get what you can?
Right. And I'm assuming that you probably, just like everything else, you kind of figure out the process or procedure, if you will, of what works for you. I remember when just the limited time I spent in Idaho, I talked about how when we hunted, we kind of cheated. We parked at the top, had another truck at the bottom.
And you can do that there.
I was about to say,
Utah does not have those opportunities. You start at the bottom. And each mountain range we have is a little different. Some are more accessible in the winter than others. And so, I'm starting to cross things off the map, like, oh, too much snow to get there. And the bird numbers fluctuate from year to year too, which is frustrating. So you'll go out and you might have had a great year last year, and this year there might have been a rain event or something, and there's hardly any birds. So yeah, you get up to where you can. We drive to the mountain. Sometimes there's a trail that gets up, but usually you're just climbing up one ridge and then coming down another, and that's your 6 hour hunt for the day. Makes it hard to trade dogs out. Usually Chucker and Hun, I'll run more than one dog at a time, where with grouse or quail or something else, I'll trade them out and let them sit in the truck or the ATV while you're giving them turns. But it's kind of an all day, pack your lunch and away you go.
right. When you're talking about something like an all day hunt, you're talking about snow and potentially ice mixed in with that shell rock and tough conditions even without the snow. Are you booting up the dogs? Are you using Musher Secret? Do you do anything with them? Talk to me about the prep for getting the dogs actually out there on the mountains with you.
Yeah, it depends. I'm running a couple setters right now, and I clip their feet down as much as I can, but I still have to use Musher Secret. Mushers, I think on Saturday I got them through about 10 miles before they started stopping to chew snowballs out. And then I've got some boots that I'll throw on them. So it depends on the conditions. It depends a lot on the humidity and the temperature with the snow and how sticky it is. Sometimes, it doesn't bother them, but if then they're in it all the time, I usually will have to boot them or do Musher Secret, but Musher Secret just wears off. It just, and they're getting snowballs in their undercarriage, everywhere. So it'll eventually shut them down.
Do you have like a certain depth that you just don't even fool with it? Like say that if they're
for sure. Yeah. Chucker hunting, a lot of times you won't get completely snowed in. You'll have the southern exposures, which will get melted off and it'll congregate the birds there. So if the dogs are in and out of it, I usually won't boot them. But if it's snow everywhere, I always take 4 boots with me. And that's just, in my bird vest, that's just good practice to have a backup. A dog, like we're talking about, breaks a nail or rips a pad or, steps on something, you can slap a boot on and he'll finish the day, no problem. A lot of times too, for whoever you're hunting with, you'll share that with them if somebody blows a pad. I've got dogs with pretty decent feet now. That's probably one of the hardest things for me to figure out with chucker hunting is getting dogs that have good feet. They can hunt back-to-back days in the rocks that we have. I don't know what you experienced out there with your dogs, if it was tough on their feet, but chucker hunting's pretty rough.
Mine seemed to do pretty good, but I also knew going into it, 3, 4, 5 months in advance, I knew that, okay, I'm going to Colorado ptarmigan hunting, kicking off the season. Then we're going to Idaho. So I kind of knew that I needed to condition my dog's feet particularly well. And so I did a lot more just roading the dogs this year than in years past. I've always done it to some extent, but this year especially just getting their feet in shape.
What do you road them on?
I just have a 4-wheeler and I free run them. I know that people have the contraptions, the belts and the straps and stuff like that. But fortunately where I'm at, I don't really need to do that. And I'll just kind of let them run at the pace of the 4-wheeler. I can speed them up, slow them down just with how fast I go. So it's mostly dirt, but I do have one gravel road adjacent to my property that I'll hop on in the back and we'll just kind of run up and down that, a few times. And of course, I start off very, very small, very short stint. And then before we're going to Colorado, I mean, we're doing a couple miles just on that gravel road, just back and forth. And
no, that's smart. I've never done that. I just usually run my dogs in chucker country year round and they kind of stay in shape. And I like to think I do, but the older I get, I don't think I'm in as good a shape as I used to be. But hiking those hills helps.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and that's the thing with dogs. I mean, I know that there are lines and breeders out there that have focused on this in the past to bring the toughness out of them. But I do know that like you can develop the dog's toughness a little bit just by conditioning them properly.
I agree. I've tried to figure that out, and I've got a good friend that kind of got me into this, and he used to say, look, if they've got dark pads, they're going to be better off. And so look for that pigment of the skin I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So if you have pink or red, that's not going to be as durable. And there may be something to that, but the wire hairs, typically out here, the ones we see have tougher feet. I've run pointers and now setters, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. They're very specialized at just running, 30, 40 miles a day and doing that several days in a row and just finding birds. That's what we usually need because there's not a bird on every ridge. There's not a covey in every draw. So we're trying to cover a lot of ground. But yeah, if you're worried about feet, which you should be out here, I think that's worth it, talking to breeders and talking to people who hunt those dogs to see what they're like. So I have had dogs in the past that didn't have great feet, and I was putting everything I could on them, running them year round, and still having to boot them in a couple mountain ranges where the rocks are just horrendous.
Yeah.
So I've had to pack dogs out before because they've, hurt themselves or their feet and they just wouldn't move. So Try not to get those dogs anymore.
Yeah, that'll give
Like
you
a
a
dog that'll
workout
run
too.
on a blown pad. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I had one pointer one time. He got cliffed out, and I don't know how we both lived to tell the tale. He couldn't go down and he couldn't go up. He was on this huge overhang, and I remember running out there, climbing out to him, putting him in my bird vest, and kind of strapping him in with a quick strap, and then climbing out where you're using hands and feet to get out of there.
Oh, wow.
I try not to go to those. That was probably 10 years ago. I was a lot younger and then in better shape. I try not to go to any of those areas anymore. But, the bird jumps over the edge, or they smell a covey, 20 yards below them on a cliff. And sometimes they'll try to get down there to point them.
Those bird crazy dogs, there's no telling what those dogs will get you, or what those birds will get the dogs into trouble with.
Yeah. Yeah, but you need that, don't you? You need a dog that wants to run to the top of every ridge and look. A couple of weeks ago, we were out hunting chukar, and it wasn't real bad. We hadn't had the big storm yet, so about half of the faces had snow on them. But boy, this one dog I have, he'll just go and go and go until he finds some. We had him on point once for 45 minutes, once for 3 minutes, and once for an hour and a half. And there was a covey there every time we got to him. I couldn't believe it, but he won't give up.
Well, and that's a good testament, especially obviously the one that was on point for an hour and a half. When you get into the dog world, somebody brand new, you're going to be met with a lot of opinions and preferences of, especially dogs with range. And the more I get to know or experience people that live out west and do more Western hunting, and their preference for rangier dogs, it's not just the field trial guys that want those rangier dogs. To your point, these birds aren't in every valley or on every ridge. You want the dogs that are going to cover the ground, because if you have a dog that ranges 40, 50 yards, that might be okay in the rough grouse woods. But if you're out hunting huns and chukar in these mountain ranges, you're going to be sucking wind a whole lot trying to get your dog within the vicinity of birds. And so it is a lot better, or preferable in some instances, to send that dog to the horizon and just be like, hey, let me know if there are birds there. It's kind of like you're just sending your scout out there looking.
Yeah, I'm going to stand on this ridge. You go check all those cliffs out, a mile that way, and I'll just stand here and watch. Yeah. I know a guy in Idaho he shoots way more birds than I do. He's a really good shot too, but he knows where they are, and he hates his dogs to range, but he hunts pheasant a lot. And so I remember he had this one GSP, and he got that. I mean, he had that thing going no more than 40 yards out, and he gets a ton of birds, but he knows right where they're going to be usually.
Yeah.
So to each their own, and it's a great big bird dog world, and I love the variety. But yeah, out here, you're right. I think most of the guys that I run with, they want to find the chukar. I mean, we don't have a lot of birds, so you need to cover some ground. You yourself have got to hike a lot, but most of our dogs will go 4 times the miles that you'll go. So if you go 10 miles, they'll go 40. Mm-hmm. And that's not busy just back and forth. That's up, down, around, working the wind.
Yeah.
The dogs I've got now, they come out of all age lines from a field trialer, but I've never run them off horseback. So they're probably more like a shooting dog type trial dog, but they've got it in them. I mean, they'll go 800-900 yards looking if there aren't any birds between here and there. So I used to worry about that, and I bought a pointer out of Wisconsin out of some grouse lines, and was worried that he would range too much, and I didn't have to worry. But yeah, I mean, he had some limb find or ridge finds out at 500 yards, 600 yards. They kind of figured out a good dog will. And if you let them go, they'll go. If you always pull them back, you can rein them in.
Yeah.
And they get used to that. And they know, hey, he's toning me. He wants me to come back. So I like the Garmin that you can set an alarm on it. On a young dog, if it's at 500 yards, it'll beep and I'll tone him back. But as they get a little bit older, I don't like to pull them back too much, because I don't want them to get used to running close. But then you go out and hunt grouse, and, they're 60, 70 yards in the woods. So
yeah, they
kind of figure that out. They like to be a good dog. I think likes to be connected to you and know where you're at. I remember one time we had a good dog. It was a buddy's dog. It was a pointer, and we were up on top of a mountain in the clouds. It was like foggy, and we lost that dog. And we always lose his dogs. because he doesn't care as much. He likes them to range out, but sometimes they kind of forget we're there. And then you spend the day looking for that dog, which isn't fun. But, you go up and over a ridge, a dog does, you'll lose him. You're down here. And that's when I had that dog the other day, or a couple of weeks ago at an hour and a half. One dog was on point really close, and the other one was on point up top. We went to the really close one, which was, 20, 30 minutes to walk to that dog's point, shot some birds, and then climbed up to the top to look for the other dog. And he was right where it had said before. But as we dropped down, we lost connection on the alpha. But we get up there and he's holding the covey, and we got to shoot birds out of that. So that worked out really well.
Well, and I mean, there's a couple interesting tidbits within that. I was going to say is these alpha systems, as much as we adore them, we like them, we love them. Some people refuse to hunt without them. They do fail. I mean, I had them fail on me in both Colorado and Idaho. Something to do with the mountains, I'm sure, but they did fail. And so it kind of got me thinking, before tracking collars, if you're talking about a dog that ranges that far and over a mountaintop or another ridge, what did the chucker hunters way back in the day utilize, really? Because, I mean, you can put a bell on them or even a beeper collar. You can't hear it when they're that far out, right? And so it's just like it kind of gets me interested or intrigued as to like how they handled that way back when. If you had a dog ranging 500 plus yards and you didn't have a collar or watch to point you in the right direction, how many dogs were lost back then?
Yeah, and we lose dogs, every couple of weeks. But again, it's usually because you're down and they're up and over the ridge. They're a mile away or wherever they're at. And a good dog will come back and find you. They hunt for you as much as they do for birds sometimes. But I've talked to guys that have been pre Garmin, and they had some old trackers back in the day. But a lot of them said you just looked all day for your dog. So, and a lot of them are those trial guys or those hardcore hunters. But I think the Garmin has really allowed people to have confidence in their dogs now. I would never go without them. I've had them fail, not just can't connect, like you lose the connection, but I've had them break. I carry extra collars. And if a receiver or a handheld failed, I could always go back to the truck, get the other one and still find the dog, I would hope. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I worry about things like that. I always like to have, an extra of everything. You go on a trip, you want an extra dog, an extra gun, extra boots, extra collars. Those are things that keep you from having a bad trip.
Yeah, redundancy. It's the name of the game in a lot of ways. And it's interesting, you living out west, your preference for longer range dogs, because you sent me an email a few weeks back and you just kind of gave me a rundown of your experience and the type of dogs you've run and the different breeds. But what really intrigued me was you kind of shed some light in the flushing dog / pointing dog combo equation, to where you got it thinking it was going to be the best of every situation, and you found that, like everything, there's a time and a place to utilize that. And so when we start talking about longer ranging dogs out west, you add in the cocker, I think is the flushing dog that you had. I wanted to explore this topic with you a little bit more, because I know I've said it or claimed it on my podcast before, to where I think it's kind of the best of both worlds. You get the pointing dog ranging out and finding it, then you get the flushing dog. And I can't really think of a scenario that wouldn't be ideal, but your email
I
intrigued
thought the
me.
same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I felt pretty, watching during the off season, some of those darn Georgia plantation videos, where you got the pointers out and the setters out finding them, and then they release the cocker to flush them and to retrieve on those bobwhite quail. And I thought that'd be the coolest thing ever. And my daughter at the time was graduating from college, and she had wanted a dog, and so I said, hey, let's look at a cocker, one that could go hunt and that's a working dog and would be healthy, and so we did that and got this cool cocker. And I had these big plans of, having dogs that are on point, and then they would hold and let the cocker run out and flush, and did that. I had a pointer at the time that I was able to get to do that. That was a lot harder than I thought it would be. and not as practical in most instances for me. I don't hunt bob whites. It's chucker mostly. The cocker is a cool dog in his own right, and I think they're just fun to hunt over and to let them run and do their thing. They're like a whirling dervish or the Tasmanian devil. I mean, they will just tear up terrain. They're great for grouse. For us with blue grouse and rough grouse, they're in sometimes really, really thick stuff. You can't even walk into it, but that little cocker can get in there and they'll get in there fast and get those birds up. So, it took me a couple of years to get the cocker obedient enough to pup or sit, or heel. And, I remember taking him out. I think it was after the season when we were out on running on chucker pairs, which is awesome because you'll have a 2 or 3 cubby mountain. Those birds pair up and you'll have 20, 30 finds, for a young dog. It's really great. So the pointer would point them, and that little cocker took him about 3 points to figure out what's up. And he'd just be watching that dog. As soon as the dog goes on point, he would rip in there and get those birds to fly. So he figured out the game real quick. And I realized he wasn't as proofed as I thought with pup and sit and heel. So we worked a little bit more that off season. And then the next year we got him where he'd do it. And the pointer would also, there was some work there, letting a dog steal his point. Instead, it's different for me to walk in front of my dog and flush those birds. But for him to let a young puppy to come in, that's a higher level of training. And I'm not the best trainer in the world. But I was able to get it done. And so we tried it out. And it was great for grouse and for other things where it was real thick. The pointer didn't mind losing the flush there. But a lot of times on blue grouse at the beginning of the season, blue grouse can be in open areas out in sage flats next to aspen and conifer trees. And they like to be on steep hills, not unlike chucker. And those blues will get up and they'll dive down. And so sometimes I'd miss out on some shots. The dog would be on point. I'd walk the cocker in, get in front of the pointer, release him. He would zoom in, and those birds, in an effort to get away, are just flying straight out. They're not getting up. They're getting out and away and down the hill. And so you're right over the top of your cocker. Mm. And so you wouldn't get the shot. And I tried him on chucker quite a bit too and had the same thing happen. It wasn't always some flushes and some points will set up perfect, when you can get below them and get the birds up. But in a lot of instances, they were just chasing the birds straight away from you and getting in the way of a shot. Mm. So
that's interesting.
I was a little disappointed in the whole thing. And then I just kind of hunted the cocker by himself. And I think I told you, I've taken Montana limits of sharp tail over him. And he's just a fun little dog. If you know the birds where they're going to be, they're in the berry patches, you can walk right up. And he loves it. He's just a happy guy. He has a hard time keeping up on an all-day chucker hunt with those short little legs.
I was about to say shorter legs for sure. It sounds like, you going back to figuring it out, and it sounds like the pointer was more receptive or accepting of the cocker going into the thick cover, as opposed to when you're out there on the side of the mountain and the pointer can probably see a good long ways. That's kind of an interesting thing that you noted there, because I'm curious of how much the pointer is just that. It's kind of like, okay, I know the birds are there.
I think that's pretty normal for pointers. Yesterday I had 2 setters out on Huns in about 10 inches of snow, and I've got one young setter. This is his first year. He's great on wowing if I woe him. But if he can see the birds, if they're starting to run, he's going to go and he'll steal the point. But I noticed yesterday when he couldn't see them, he was over below a hill. The wind was coming up over, and he's locked up steady, and they were only 40 yards in front of him. He had all the patience in the world then because he can't see them. But a lot of times, the chucker, you're pointing downhill. You've got thermals that are rising up the ridges and up the mountain. So dogs will go up and they'll work those thermals, and you'll get a lot of points, where they're on top of the birds, and they can see. And it's different again for me to go in front of that dog, but to let the cocker in. But sometimes, he wouldn't see the cocker. He wouldn't know what was going on, especially in thick stuff like quail. We have a lot of valley quail or California quail out here.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
it's interesting because I've spoken to a number of trainers that one of the primary things that they include in their routine or methods, as opposed to maybe some other people that you don't hear about as often, is they will proof their dogs on sighted birds. I know we talk about all the time, especially when you talk to people with puppies. They want to do the wing on a string. And so we talk about the importance of, well, that's a sight point situation. You need to get your dog using your nose. Well, then people kind of forget all about the sight point and they never work that scenario again. And so then
yeah,
the scenario that you're describing, your pointer sees the birds, it's going to be enough to just kind of tip them over the edge and break. But you also hear about it in testing situations, especially something like the NAVHDA Invitational, where there's so many birds by the end of a week to where they've been running and planting so many birds that they just linger around, and all of a sudden these dogs are faced with running birds left and right. You need to proof your dogs against the visual just as much as the scenting aspect as well.
absolutely. And I think that's the normal progression of a young dog. The first year, I don't put any limits on them. But the second year, yeah, you see the birds, you've got to stop. They start to run. It doesn't matter. That's not a wounded bird. We haven't shot them. You're not on a retrieve. So it's a higher level of training. In talking to Ronnie Smith, he says that he sees a lot more of these visually cued dogs now. I was talking to him about one of my dogs, and he said, I don't know. I don't think he is. But I've had dogs in the past for sure. Once these, they want to see the bird and they don't care how close they've got to get. They've got to see it. And so they smell it and they'll come up and they're bumping the birds. And then other dogs, they're fine pointing from 100 yards back. They're fine pointing, where they can't, if they never see the bird, it's fine. They just know it's there. And the scent of it is enough to staunch them up. So each dog's so different and hard to work with.
Yeah.
Some of them anyway. Others are just easy to train, right?
Ultimately, I think that this is my theory anyway, that I could be completely wrong, but like when we talk about the dogs that are more prone to break on a visual of a bird as opposed to scent, I think it comes down to confidence. I think the dog that is stopping on scent and just knows like, hey, there's a bird that way, and it could be 75 yards up. I can't see it, but I'm staying here. It's just he's confident that it's there. And then the dog that's always looking to confirm and see the bird, those are the ones that are like, all right, I smell something, but I've been fooled and tricked before. I want to actually put my eyes on it and confirm it. It's almost like they're trying to find proof before they lock up and send the message to us saying, yeah, there's a bird here, come get it.
Yeah, and I think some of those latter group of dogs, they like to see birds fly too.
Right. Yeah.
They usually like to chase. I've had some though that they're okay not chasing. They just love to see them fly, and that is the pinnacle for them. They love it. It's just you can just see them. They're so excited as the birds get up. So, and that's great if you can. And I think a good dog has a lot of that in them, and then they'll start to hold those points and get where they're longer and longer. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for confidence in a dog. I think developing confidence in a dog, and more than confidence, maybe it's a maturity too, where they're like, hey, I've got a lot of trust in my hunter. I know in my instance, he's going to miss the bird, but he's going to flush it. I'm going to get to see it fly up. And the older they get, it seems like they just, I used to try to push, all that in real quick on a dog, but I know a lot of it's just through experience. And I think the more they experience it and learn it on their own, the better they are.
Yeah.
In the long run. Sometimes that takes 2 or 3 years, but that's okay.
Well, and there are some dogs, we've spoken about them sometimes, to where some dogs just truly want that chase. They love that chase. They live for the chase. I think, again, could be wrong on this, I think the dogs that more or less what you're describing, that they just love to be where a bird takes flight, the flushing. I think those are the dogs that more or less found a reward in that happening. You know, when we talk about don't shoot bump birds or rip birds,
Yes.
I think the dogs that more or less do that more often, that they just love to fly birds, they're prone to do that because they've been rewarded for that in the past. If somebody's like, oh, it's no big deal, I'll still shoot it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they got the reward for them kicking it up, as opposed to some dogs, you know, if a bird gets up and the dog takes a chase after that, that's completely different in my book than a dog that initiated bumped the bird and actually ripped it and caused the chase, if that's fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something to that. I wouldn't disagree with you one bit. As I look back at Chucker Dog, two of my favorite were they ranged a lot, but they were very uber cautious. So they would point from 80, 120 yards. They knew, and a covey of birds is easy to smell, I think, especially out in the desert where there's not a lot of smells. But they will hold way back and wait for you. And then when you get up, you know, they'll look at you out of the corner of their eye, and then they'll relocate and wait for you again. And those birds maybe have wandered off, but he'll go find them, and then he'll point them close. Where other dogs, they want to get within, you know, they want to see how close they can get. They don't want the bird to fly, but they want to be right there. And the first group of dogs, they're much more successful because the birds usually don't know the dog is there. They can't see it unless he's, you know, skyline, but he can be back so far over a rise and he's smelling them and he'll point. I remember one time I was hiking up this new mountain range for me. It was during hunting season, and my dog was way, you know, 500-600 yards, 700 yards up the ridge, wasn't finding anything but a big buck on the way up. He pointed a buck and he came out of his draw, but he goes up there and goes on point. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be a hike. And so, you know, I'm hiking, running, trying to speed up there. And after about 20 minutes, I could see he goes off point. I thought, the birds have been bumped or they've moved. And he was kind of over this rise, and I didn't know what was up there. But pretty soon here he comes, and he comes back down and gets over this cliff and looks down at me like, oh, there you are. And then he turned and took off and went right on point again, same place he was. And I don't know if this is true, but it was almost like he's coming down to go, hey, I've got a covey up here. What is the holdup? Let's go. But he went back up, relocated, waited. I finally got up there and we shot a couple birds out of it. But a dog that, you know, trusts that you're coming, knows that that's your job to flush. That's hopefully the goal.
Yeah.
And they don't want the birds to fly.
So that dog pretty much essentially pulled a Lassie and came and found you and said, hey, Timmy fell down in the well over here. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure it was just a fluke, but and he never did it again. He was kind of young. I think he was, you know, like a year and a half. And so, but he's one that, he wouldn't hold for much more than 20 or 30 minutes.
Well, see, now you don't sound like an upland hunter. The average upland hunter will take that one off chance and just circumstance and apply it. And for 10 years say, my dog does this all the time.
Yeah. I keep waiting to get one of those dogs that'll circle downwind, right, and stop a rooster from running.
Right. You know, man. So when we talk about, I want to go back to the cocker and the correct sequence or spot that you could use them in. You talked about you found it was troubling or challenging for when he went and flushed the covey, they would flush straight away from you and you couldn't get a shot. Could that be alleviated and not have that hurdle or challenge with some better training? So like if you train the dog to kick them up and then sit and be completely steady on their own, where maybe you don't even have to give them the hup or sit command, but it's just trained and ingrained enough to where birds get up, I sit. Would that give you enough of a shooting window to be safe and you don't have to forego that opportunity?
I think so, but not a whole lot. He would sit to flush. Here's the problem. Chucker, you'll get him in grass and the dog goes on point, and some dogs are, you know, the closer they get, the higher their tail comes up. Great. If you know where the birds are, sometimes there's an old burned up tree and you know it's middle of the day. They're there getting in the shade. Great. You can walk right in. Sometimes you release that dog though, and he goes out 30, 40, 50, you know, you're like, hey, come on back. That's too far. And then you got to walk up even farther. So the one thing that cracks me up too is everybody's like, hey, whenever you're chucker hunting, just circle down below and get them to flush up. great if you can do that. Honestly, for me, that's 1 out of 6 or 7 points. You have the opportunity to do that if the birds will go, but the terrain and the wind, it just doesn't allow itself. You're in a chute with 2 cliffs. The birds are down there. You can't walk down around those cliffs. You got to walk. There's only one way down.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I just think it's more about where you're at, how steep the incline is, if the birds are going to fly down or if they're going to fly up. And some situations are perfect for it. It just seems like to me, chukar hunting wasn't the game for the cocker. Yeah, but quail is great. Thick stuff, grouse is great for the cocker. He loves that. Pheasant hunting. Oh yeah, I hate pheasants. A pheasant will ruin a perfectly good hunt any day of the week, or sharp-tail even sometimes in Montana. But yeah, if pheasant's your thing, the cocker would be good for that too, I think.
Yeah, man, you're really not sounding like an upland hunter again. You don't like pheasant. I can't believe that.
Yeah, I guess if we had more of them out here, maybe I'd like them. But yeah, I like to see my dogs, and I like to see them on point. I don't like to see pointing dogs running. But
yeah,
but yeah, Huns and chukar sometimes will do that same thing to you. They'll relocate and run.
All the birds will run. I mean, to what extent? Some are obviously a little bit tougher than others, but I mean, especially you start talking gambles and scale quail. I mean, they run like devils, man. They're just mean. If I mean, you get them on that bare dirt and rock and gravel, and they'll haul. Rough grouse obviously run quite a bit. Pheasant, though, I think it's a mixture of them running mixed with the cattail sloughs, right? Like
the terrain they're in.
Yeah. I've experienced pheasant hunting in a number of different situations. I'm sorry, I don't want to hunt them in ag, and I don't want to hunt them in cattail sloughs. If you find me a nice native grass, field, I'll do it. It's fun. I enjoy it, but I don't want to hunt in sunflower seed patches. I don't want to hunt in cattail sloughs.
Phragmites. You ever hunted in those?
I have not.
Holy cow.
No.
Phragmites or Phragmites. They're 6-8 feet tall. They're like cattails, but sharp and just tear you up and super thick. And I remember even this year in Montana on our hunt up there, we had to walk around the grassy edges of the sloughs. There were so many pheasants. You get a dog in there and you'd be in there for an hour trying to get the dog out just from one pheasant after another, which is great. But we're out there to hunt, sharp-tails and Huns. But back to running birds, was it this year? I don't know. It was maybe North Dakota one year. We saw a sharp-tail run about 250 yards across, out from underneath a point. We had a flock there, and one's just running. And we thought, let's just wait. Don't flush the others. Let's wait. And that thing just hauled. We're like, is that a pheasant? No, that's a sharp-tail. So they do run, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, all of them do. I'm reminded the woodcock, every year it seems like you're hearing more and more people about woodcock running. And I'm like, well, woodcock will strut, but they don't really necessarily run on your dogs.
Do they kind of wobble? I've never hunted them, but
yeah, I mean, they'll do their version of the running. But, when people start talking about woodcock running, I'm like, man, you need to go experience some of these other birds to really see what a running bird is like, because you get a dog that learns how to handle running birds efficiently and consistently. That's the dog that I want in my lineup. I don't care if it ranges 40 yards. I don't care if it ranges 400 yards. If a dog knows how to handle a running bird, there is a situation or a hunt that I find myself in that I could use that dog.
I've got a theory on running birds, but most of it's anecdotal, of course. But we've had some really dry years out here in the West, in the Mountain West. And we've had a couple of years where this doesn't usually line up, a dry year and good birds. Usually dry year, not a lot of birds, not a lot of cover, not a lot of insect, not a lot of feed for those young broods. But there's been twice that I can remember where we had we had dry years, but it was a good spring, and we had a lot of Huns and chukar. And man, they would not hold for anything. I think a lot of it has to do with where they can feel comfortable in, whether or not they can see you or the dog. And so if you've got thick grass, you've got good cover for them, they're much more confident in holding. But I know with the rough grouse we have here too, and even bluegrass, once the leaves come off, and everything up high is starting to dry out, they're not holding either. They're running. Whereas
Yeah.
before you're like, oh my gosh, that bird would have held. So I think it has to do with the confidence they have and their ability to sit there.
Yeah.
It's funny when the first snow comes out here because a lot of those birds think they're camouflaged. I got a picture from some chucker the other day where the two dogs are about 20 yards away from this covey, and there's one bird standing there like, he can't see us, and from like 100 yards I could see that bird just standing out there.
Yeah.
And of course that's one will get shot and hopefully not pass those genes on to
Yeah.
any other chucker. But
well, I mean, I would second your experience or your theory for the most part, especially, I think of my time in Arizona last year with scale quail. When we found good, consistent grass last year, we would get into the scale quail, and they would hold a heck of a lot better than especially the gambles that were up in the mesquite, cholla cactus, stuff like that, to where those gambles, you could just look up and see them hauling like 75 yards away. And
I love gambles, but where I hunt them, there's usually grass, and they'll stick.
Hold up.
And I mean, we've had some great points on coveys, but you're right. If you're out in a drainage, a creek bottom that's dry, they just run forever, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, they will just run and run and run until they figure out or they feel secure with that overhead cover. The only bird that I would say in a specific situation that probably doesn't really live up to that would be the pheasant in the cattail slough, to where they have the overhead cover, but they're just going to run through that cattail slough. In my opinion, the pheasant hold even better in the native grass than they do in the cattails, because it's like so many times you'll see a pointing dog go on point. You go kicking in and embrace the suck and go stomping through that cattail slough just to find no bird. Well, then 40 yards up, again, and then you just push the birds all the way to the end, and they dip out and flush out on the back end of it. So it seems like they're really easy to run in cattails, but if you find them in native grasses, they tend to hold a lot better.
Yeah. Well, I think that supports the theory. That's a good observation. Again, we get a few pheasants on accident every year. We call them mountain pheasants. They'll be up, where the Huns are hanging out. You catch a rooster up there for some reason. We had one the other day. We were looking for quail in a little creek, and sure enough, there was one sitting under a sagebrush that popped up and scared the crap out of you. But those are fun, a little bycatch.
Yeah.
But it's hard. They do like to run. I don't want to chase them through cattails.
Now, in your experience facing all these running birds everywhere you've gone, I mean, you've had a healthy experience all across the country on a number of different species. Would you say that the flushing dog helps with the running birds, or does it just kind of push them out of gun range?
Gambles are a good example. So I've done the pointer flusher thing there, and then sometimes I just whoa the pointer and let the flusher try to get them. Those gambles will run 200-300 yards in front of you if they see you coming. So if you're comfortable letting your flusher go, mine, he's a little bit stickier. He knows I don't like him out there, so we're not always that successful. But if we can get close enough and you send them and let them go, absolutely, because then it breaks them up, and then you got singles and doubles that do stick in little bits of cover. So that's usually our, if you can get him in a good area, they'll just hold. But if you can get the cocker on him, he'll flush them and break them up. And that would be my preferred method. If it all works out. But again, sometimes you come over a rise and you see him running 200 yards away. Those blankety blank gambles.
So I'm interested as somebody who originally thought that the flusher pointer combo was going to be, the end all be all. Sounds like there's certain situations that is the case, and other situations that aren't. Are you going to fool with after this English cocker, his time is called? Are you going to go through it again? Or are you going to mess with it? Or are you just going to stick with the pointers again?
Probably stick with pointers. I think if chucker weren't my main game, if I did hunt quail and pheasant more often, I think I'd always have one. They're just really fun to have. I mean, all dogs have a personality. These dogs have more personality than most. So my wife loves that dog. My daughter loves that dog. So they're fun to have. All our dogs are house dogs. But no, this year I had a young setter that I was, a couple of young setters, but one is his first year hunting. And so I didn't take the cocker out with him at all because I'm focused on him, getting him into birds, letting him kind of line up or connect the dots, figure out, okay, I find him, I point him, he shoots, he flushes. So a cocker, you got to hunt them separate until they're ready to hold their points. So too much learning going on with young dogs. So yeah, I don't know. I'd probably just stick with the pointer or a setter.
Yeah.
For what I do the majority of the time.
Well, and obviously, again, as you said, you have more experience with the pointers than the flushers. I'm curious, as somebody that attempted it and tried it, and what was at least easier, or what did you prefer developing more? The
Which one's easier to train?
I didn't want to phrase it like that because there's too much context, but I guess like to get them in just a decent enough shape to hunt chukar and huns like you do, training that dog that stretches the horizon 400 or 500 yards over the next ridge, getting them to be steady enough to give you enough time to get there, or get a flushing dog dressed up with the sit and the steadiness and working within gun range. Which one do you find typically a little bit more easier to go about doing?
Training a pointer's a little bit easier to develop for what we do. The flushers, and I've had a couple labs in the past, and one of them I trained quite a bit, but they it's real heavy or obedience intense, where the point, a good setter or pointer, and I mean the English pointer, when I say pointer there, they usually want to point, and so it's all instinctual. So for them, it's all just about exposure, getting them to hunt in front of you, understanding what they do, and developing these habits. And then their instincts kick in, get them into birds, they'll start pointing. There's a little bit, usually that second year, kind of correction saying, nope, I'm going to get in front of you. I'm going to flush. You're going to wait. But that's usually pretty easy with most of these dogs. If you're getting them into birds, they like to point, and the repetition is easy to build. So I don't know. I'm pretty blessed. I can go run on wild birds in 20 minutes. And so all of my young dogs, they've just grown up on wild birds. And I know I've heard on your podcast that conundrum, it takes birds to build a bird dog. How do you do that without birds? You either got to have them, you've got to drive to them, you've got to buy them, or you've got to send your dog to somebody, a trainer who has them. But you've got to do one of those three things for a pointer. They've got to want to find them. They've got to want to point. So that's the thing. The cocker, it's more, hey, you're going to place, you're going to sit, you're going to not whine, you're going to come, you're going to sit. You're going to sit to flush. You're going to sit when I tone you or vibrate you, or when I say hup. And so that's just more yard work, I think. We did, with him, I did some early bird development, but I don't think he needed it. I mean, he'd just go out and go crazy and chase whatever anyway. So we could have waited probably a year, and before he saw a bird, he'd still be fine.
Yeah.
He's the one that'll pass out. If you can throw the ball 800 times on a hot afternoon and his heart will finally give out. You have to kind of limit him and what he does. He loves to retrieve, loves to chase birds.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, and I mean, you raise a couple interesting points here to where I think if you're doing a hunt test dog or a trial dog, you might get into that advanced level of training that the pointing dogs require to succeed in that space, right? To where if you're talking about just a quality pointing dog that's going to go find and hold birds for you, like you said, it's like just get a really good genetic dog and go hunting. It really is kind of that simple at the end of the day. Just putting them on the opportunities, to where the flushing dog, if you're not the type that really necessarily enjoys training, or you don't want to provide that structure and consistency, I can see how that can be a little bit more challenging than just buying a good quality bred English pointer or setter and just going out there and having fun and just letting it unfold and them learn as you go.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. And maybe it's not always that easy with those pointers or setters, but a lot of times it is. But yeah, you need a whoa command on a dog so you can stop them. You need a hup or a sit with a
Yeah.
little cock or two.
Well,
But
and you mentioned Ronnie Smith. You know, obviously, I haven't had Ronnie on the podcast yet. I look forward to one day our paths are going to cross at some point. I've had Rick, but are you a Smith method guy? Do you train your pointers with that, or just
I think
dabble?
I've trained dogs with George Hickok's method and loved it. It worked great. I've done the Hunt Smith method. It worked great. I've got Justin McGrail's plan or program, and I've used that on my youngest setter, and it works great. I think you've probably said this before, but if you just stick to it and you're reading the dog and you're helping them learn and guiding them and developing, any of those are going to work. But yeah, the woe post and transitioning to a flank collar and then to a neck collar with it was very, very easy. I don't understand why that is, but they're onto something. It just worked. I didn't think it would. I thought it was kind of gimmicky, but I'm like, hey, I'm going to try this. This is, we'll see what this is. The Gibbons West method, I've tried that with the pinch collar. And I mean, they all work, right? There's great dogs out there that have gone through every program. So I just really, the thing about Ronnie and Susanna too, Ronnie can read a dog like it's a different language.
Right.
When you go to somebody that's trained 10,000 dogs or whatever it is, it's, they've seen a lot of things that you haven't. So talking to him, it just, and Rick's the same way, but Ronnie's just, he just knows so much. And it's hard to keep up with him, but to see him kind of observe a dog and see what they're doing. I remember him going, well, look at that dog. That dog's excited. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, he's walking higher on his feet. He just, he's confident in the setting. And I'm like, wow, higher on his feet. And it's not anything I even thought that you could see a dog do. You can see their head, their tail, even their eyes, their ears perk up. But yeah, there's just a lot there that he knows that most of us don't. So
yeah, just the body language and to your point, I mean, I say it all the time is like, don't focus so much on the how, focus on the why. The principles of dog training are the principles of dog training, no matter if you put your dog in the hands of George Hickox, who's on my short list as well, Ronnie Smith, Rick Smith, Mo Lindley. It doesn't matter. Like all of these trainers, like, it's proven. There's a reason why these methods have been around for as long as they've been around. They will work. I would argue that each method fits a trainer and a dog specifically more so than others, like matching those up. But no matter what, even if you have the dog that would learn on the Smith method faster than the Wes Gibbons method, doesn't matter. If you stick with the Wes Gibbons long enough and you focus on the principles, you're still going to end up with that dog. It may have just taken a few weeks quicker on the Smith method or vice versa. Fill in the blank with any method that's proven over time.
Yeah, and a good trainer, to your point, is going to know when to do what. It's not that the Hunt Smith method is just this, or that the Gibbons West method is only a check cord. I mean, they read the dog. They know when to put the dog up and when to move it forward. They know how to help the dog think through things. It's different correcting a dog after the behavior and correcting the dog when the thought is in his mind.
Yeah.
He's about to take the bird out, and a good trainer, and I'm not that, a good trainer sees that and they're reading the dog and they stop it. And then the dog's like, okay, I won't do that. And he hasn't even moved. So
yeah,
a good trainer's a good trainer.
So many people that share a field with these legends, let's call them, I mean, that's what they are in the dog training realm. Whether you agree with their methods or not, these guys are they've left their legacy, maybe not even legends, but they're leaving their legacy. When you share a field with them, so many people are like, man, he's just so quick to react or respond to a dog. I'm like, no. He's anticipating. He's literally walking the dog into making that mistake so then he can then correct it. When we go out and we're just learning and we're just hoping that it works out, we're responding, we're reacting, where these other guys, they're driving, they're bringing it out and making it unfold in front of them. And it's funny to where you talk about all these trainers, you know, when I got to talk and get to know Rick a little bit, it was shortly after I was with Martha Greenlee. He was picking my brain about her. Then when I was with Mo Lindley, that was a few weeks removed from Rick, and he was picking my brain about Rick. They're all after each other's cheat codes, and they all know that everybody knows exactly what they're doing, but the good ones are always constantly trying to get better, to where, you know, the other people that say, I've been doing it this way for 20 years, I'm not going to stop now. Those are the people that you got to kind of be worried about, because they're not trying to get better. They just, you know, that they figured it out a few times before in the past, and they're no longer trying to progress forward anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And another characteristic that seems to, all the good ones seem to have, and I bumped into Jerry Coulter this year in Montana, just in a bird cleaning room at the hotel.
Nice.
Like, he was on his way through, and we're cleaning a pile of sharp tails and huns, and he was in there too. But and I would put him in this group. They're all very humble,
yeah,
unassuming, and there's no ego there. And I think that has a lot to do with their ability to work with dogs and to see what the dog needs and help guide it, instead of saying, I have a system and I'm going to implement this on you, which is more me. I'm more of a type A personality. I don't have the patience. I'm not as good. I like to hunt, and I want a good dog. So I know when I need help. But yeah, they're very, you know, just humble, really good people. And I think you have to be that way for dogs to trust you and to, you know, want to work with you. So
ultimately, it's like, I call it go with the flow. They all have an element of just like, all right, yeah, that happens. It sucks.
Laid back.
Yeah, just laid back. They take it on the chin.
Put him up, and we'll try it again later.
Yeah.
We'll give him another go later. Now's not the time. His head's not in it. Or for me, it's I remember Ronnie one time was like, hey, your head's not in it.
Yeah.
Like, your tone right now is saying this. I know what you're trying to convey. He says, but you need to step back and realize, how are you saying this, or how are you exhibiting this? And I was like, oh man, I didn't even know.
Yeah.
So.
No, I would agree with all that. I mean, it's those are the people that, you know, I've been asked, obviously, especially since the Rick Smith episode, if I would recommend anybody go to the Smith seminar. I'm like, yeah, go to the Smith seminar, go to the Perfection Kennel seminar, go to the George Hickox, go to all of them if you can or and able. I think if you compartmentalize and you really take the information and the lessons for what they're actually communicating, and again, focusing on the principles of why does the woe post work rather than how do I stand there and hold this rope and do this? That's not the question. The question is why. Why does the point of contact on the hindquarters and the point of contact on the neck translate so well to the belly collar and the neck? Ultimately, that's why, because you establish 2 point of contacts, and you're just doing a wireless version of it in the field. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But it's like that. Yeah. To your point, you're like, it seemed like kind of gimmicky when you start off, but once they explain it and you're open to that lesson, it starts to make sense. And then you understand, oh, the point of contact. Well, the West Gibbons is just creating that point of contact on the neck, to where they aren't doing the hind leg. They're not doing the woe post or the belly collar. Everything's done on the neck. One isn't better than the other. It's just how they go about doing it. That's all it is.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, going from one, you know, I like to learn. And so I get more excited when I see a new system. I'm like, well, I'll try that on this dog. Right.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that too. And it's fun to see how it works and to see the dogs develop. So
yeah,
good times.
Well, Steve, I mean, in your experience traveling so many dogs, obviously, you know, your little experience in the flusher and everything, you know, coming on here, we're just going to kind of shoot it BS a little bit, just talk about dogs. I think we've done that, but you know, is there something that I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, I don't think so. You've been asking good stuff, so it's fun to talk with you, and it is just kind of a session where we're chatting. But yeah, it's my perspective is unique. I guess, you know, you're in Middle Tennessee, which I have some experience with. and think, well, what birds are out there? And then to hear you talk about ruffed grouse, I was remembering a time we were squirrel hunting in high school, and a grouse got up, and I thought, oh, I didn't know there were grouse around here. But never to the point where, I mean, after turkey hunting and deer hunting back there, never would have seen them enough to even think you could hunt them. But so that's pretty cool. Have you found any this year? And if so, how many?
I have not this year. I've done very limited hunting here locally.
You've been out of state mostly, huh?
I've been out of state mostly. I just got back from Georgia. I did go a few weeks ago, and pretty sure we flew 2. But when we talk about hearing flushes, I don't like saying for sure we flew them unless I actually put eyes on them, because we all know what a flush grouse. I mean, if you've been rough grouse hunting, you know what they sound like. But there's also a ton of times to where, you know, our ears can play our ears can play.
My wife was reminding me yesterday a time that we were grouse hunting, and she said, remember that time you fell down and a grouse flushed like 5 feet in front of you and you didn't even see it or hear it? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. You know, she was, 5 yards away and saw it. She's like, why aren't you shooting at it? She looked over and I'm falling down the hill. But it's hearing is important, I guess, with grouse. I don't know. Our grouse are quite a bit different. I need to go to the upper Midwest maybe and try the grouse out there.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds fun. We get usually September is all grouse for us here because it's too hot to hunt. There's too many snakes. You can't get out where the chukar are, and it doesn't even open until like the 26th or 28th of September. But usually we go up high elevation, 8, 9, 10,000 feet, and we hunt grouse up there. And you can get into, we'll get into rough grouse and blue grouse all on the same day.
Yeah. Oh, we did when I was out there in Idaho. It was awesome. And yeah, the audible reaction to a rough grouse flush is so huge to where, unfortunately I had a buddy that I got to take grouse hunting for the first time up north in Wisconsin this past season. And he has some hearing issues. And so he's got, a cochlear implant and all that stuff. Well, when you're shooting and you're going through the brush, he takes that off because it costs a lot of money.
It's really noisy.
Right.
Yeah. And he doesn't want to lose it. I see.
He doesn't want to lose it, damage it. And then also that you bring up a good point. Any amplification, any of these hearing protection, it's tough to do in the rough grouse woods because you're constantly getting brush and stuff dragging against your clothes and your vest and your gun. Your wind and everything amplifies it. But if you can't hear that rough grouse flush, I was standing right next to him. We were trying to get his young dog on the first rough grouse, and we knew that he was working a bird, and the bird gets up on our right, and he never saw it, with me literally like tapping him on the shoulder trying to direct him to the flush. He just couldn't respond fast enough. And so the hearing in the rough grouse was huge.
Yeah, and I would say even with Huns and chukar, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Half the time you're looking one direction where the dog is, and they get up, they've run 30 yards to the right, and you're not going to see them. You're going to hear them first.
Yeah.
And I probably need to wear hearing protection more than I do.
We all say that every single year.
It's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
I just haven't found one yet that cuts back on the wind noise and allows you to hear things without. You got to take a lot of things out, but you want to keep some things in to be able to hear.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that the technology is only going to get better and better. I don't think it's right there yet, but it's actually on my list to start finding 1 or 2 companies and do some kind of episode on it and talk about this stuff.
I had a window open on my computer just last week. I was like, oh, I'm about ready to pull the trigger on these. I think it was Tetra or something. And then I heard of another one. And I'm like, I got to know which one's the best.
Yeah.
Some of them are, $2,000-$3,000.
Yeah. That's what's kept me from trying to do it. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like
I don't want to try 3 of those to see which one works.
Yeah. No, it's I don't know. It's one of those things. Eventually I'm going to do it, but fortunately I don't duck hunt as much, and I don't do that much shooting for it to really be too detrimental to me, at least knock on wood. I think so. But those guys that go sit in a duck blind, especially one of those metal container duck blinds that just
with 5 or 6 guys in them all blasting away,
man,
with like 3.5-inch shells, right?
Yeah. It's thank you. I'm good on that one. But
I've got a good friend that I encouraged to come with me bird hunting. And then he always calls. He just texted the other day. He's like, "Oh, the teal are in. You got to come." He's a big duck hunter, and I'm like, I cannot not take my dogs out and go duck hunt. It's still chucker season, I can't do it. So I've never never duck hunted. But hey, I was curious with your tour this last hunting season, how many species were you able to get on, see, or be exposed to?
So
what's the total count?
I haven't totaled anything this year. I mean, I'm behind on all
you got
kinds of stuff.
Ptarmigan,
but I did get the whitetail ptarmigan. I got the chucker. What was got the blue grouse, and I missed the valley quail. That was I was trying to knock off 4 on the first loop. We never came across
valley quail year,
and
we had a lot.
We saw. So there was 2 times I saw valley quail. One, we were driving into the property that we could hunt. They were crossing the road, and it was in a section that you couldn't hunt. Which I'm not that big of a road hunter anyway. But
valley quail.
It is what it is. And the other one,
around your car, kind of taunt you. And
the other time was actually at the campground. Lucy, I was airing her out, and she goes on point. And I'm just like, you're at the campground. I was in Crocs. Like I'm just not, I wasn't even paying attention.
Lucy. You didn't shoot it, but count it for Lucy.
Right. And so Lucy points, and I'm like, well, what does she point? And I'm walking over there thinking that she's just mousing around or something. And Tweety Bird's there or something. Next thing you know, 4 or 5 valley quail dip out. And we were told when we went there that technically you could hunt the campground, but we couldn't find it in writing. And it was one of those, like, we're sitting there like Googling and checking all the regs, like, can you hunt them? Because where they went, it was like,
just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. And I'm looking at it.
People camp there.
And it's just like, how many times have you gone off on somebody told you something that was completely wrong, or they misinterpreted it to begin with? And so we thought about it briefly, but then I'm like, nah, the last thing I want to even do is bring attention to us in the campground, because there were plenty of other people there.
Right.
So I at least got to see them, but I didn't get to shoot them. But other than that, obviously I got to shoot huns and ruffs and woodcock. And so I've had a great season this year, but knocked off 3 species out of the 4 that I was trying to knock off the list.
That's cool.
Well, Steve, I think that me and you could keep BSing for a while. We might have to circle back around and do it again. But, listeners.
Okay. Well, thanks. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is presented by Standing Stone Supply, Onyx Hunt, Final Rise, and Upland Gun Company. Hit that subscribe button so you be sure to catch the next one. And Steve, we'll talk soon, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick.